It's time for Drummer Nation. It's time again for Drummer Nation. A little bit of explanation is in order for this episode. A few years ago, the team at Classic Drummer asked me to go along with them to the NAMM show and to get some interviews. So I prevailed to call upon all my friends in the industry, on the industry side of things, and get them on camera. And to that end, we got more than a dozen of them, and they've been languishing in archive. The magazine doesn't come out that often. They wanted to have a chance to get to everybody, and we all felt like these interviews should be out. So we got all kinds of industry giants. Thankfully, we got Remo Belli and Johnny Craviotto at that time, because as most of us know, soon thereafter, they both passed away. So we were very happy we got them. We got a whole bunch of others, and one of them that's been languishing all this time, who really deserves to be seen, is my friend John Dechristopher. John Dechristopher was the artist relations manager at Zildjian, among other things, for more than 20 years, having made his bones under the great Lenny DiMuzio, who pretty much invented artist relations in the music world as we know it. So I wanted to get that interview out, and I wanted to explain why you'll see two bugs on here, Classic Drummer and Drummer Nation. This is through their graciousness that we have this interview, and I hope you enjoy it. Here's Johnny. I'm proud to now welcome Sabian Cymbals as an official sponsor of Drummer Nation. The former Crescent Vanguard series are now widely available as part of the legendary Sabian HH models. HH cymbals are traditionally hand-hammered into shape and sound by Sabian craftsmen. Each cymbal receives between 2,000 and 4,000 hammer blows, resulting in increased musicality, tone and complexity, and unmatched sonic texture favored by drummers in the know for generations. Find out more about the Vanguard series and all other Sabian models at Sabian.com. Musician, designer, and award-winning innovator Ron Dannette relentlessly pursues quality of sound. Every Dannette classic drum is crafted completely by hand, carefully assembled one at a time, and personally signed by Ron himself. The shell weights are tuned for optimal performance, giving each one inherent resonance, full-range dynamics, and a pure, rich tone. All Dannette classic snare drums feature soft, contoured beds that are deep cut to eliminate snare buzz and accommodate the use of wider 42-strand snares. Compare a Dannette with others in its class, and you'll discover that the alternative is compromise.
Hi, John. Great to see you again.
Good to see you too, Michael.
I'd like to ask you some things, being the established, veteran, lovable guy you are.
Thank you.
Tell me how you started as a drummer and ended up working in artist relations.
Well, I started playing drums when I was 12 years old. Like a lot of kids my age, I was influenced by all the British bands, Rolling Stones, the Beatles. And that carried me through high school, playing in bands. I went to work at a music store after I actually didn't finish college. I went to work at a music store in 1979 at 19 years old. And that was the beginning of meeting all these people in the industry that later would be, companies that I worked for. One of them being Zildjian, one of them being Simmons Electronic Drums, which was my first job in the industry in 1985. I moved out here to Los Angeles to work for Simmons. And from there, I went to work for Drum Workshop for a few years, and then ended up at Zildjian in 1989 and as artist relations manager, and then was there for 24 years.
Well, I know you ran into a dear friend of all of us right away at Zildjian, who was something of a mentor to you, the great Lenny DiMuzio.
Absolutely, yeah. And Lenny, I'll tell you, Lenny I met as far back as 1980 when I worked at Wurlitzer. It was in downtown Boston. And Lenny would come in, on Zildjian business with clinics. He'd bring artists in like Simon Phillips and Billy Cobham and all these great drummers, and we got to be friends, and actually invited me to see Buddy Rich a couple of times which, I never dreamed that I'd be working side by side with him years later. And then when I went to work at Zildjian, he was a great friend and a great mentor. And
Well, he's considered the originator of the whole artist relations program.
yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about artist relations,
Sure.
because it's a little more complicated than an athlete on a cereal box, which would be a celebrity endorsement.
Right.
There's much more to it than that. What does it entail?
Well, and that's a great way to put it, because unlike a celebrity on a cereal box, I mean, it's pretty finite with Michael Jordan or Tiger Woods, that these guys are earning millions of dollars in contracts with whatever their sport is. Whereas with a musician, there's ebb and flow with their career. You want to sign someone that is going to, it's reciprocal, someone that's going to promote your product, expose your product, influence consumers to buy that product. But at the same time, you need to be able to support that person, in the good times and in the bad times. So
It becomes like a family relationship.
that absolutely does.
I know in my capacity with the company I was involved with, we would have artists that were afraid to tell us if they had lost a certain gig.
Yeah.
And I would say, it's not about the gig, man. It's about you as an artist.
Absolutely. And I had lunch with someone today, and I won't mention his name, but he's kind of not in between gigs, but it's his sort of a low time right now in terms of the amount of exposure he's getting. But I think in the world we live in today with social media, what it is, even the guys that aren't playing stadiums are still active in social media. They're still getting their face out there, and in many cases exposing the products that they endorse. So I think the companies are still getting a benefit, even if they're not playing in front of 20,000 people. There's still an audience out there.
And it has to be a reciprocal relationship. The artist brings something to the company and vice versa.
That's right. Yeah.
What are some of the misconceptions of young artists looking into getting the coveted endorsement gig?
I think, talking about social media, there's certainly really, really positive things about it. But I think and I won't blame it on social media, but I think there's a tendency for maybe some of the younger players to assume things and assume that all endorsements involve free product, involve massive exposure from the manufacturer of the instrument, the manufacturing company, and it really isn't like that. And it's really more about what that individual can provide to the company he endorses. And in fact, I clarify this with a lot of people. When people talk about endorsing a product, they are an endorser because they're the person endorsing a cymbal company, a drum company, and really the onus is on them to promote that brand versus that company to promote that artist. I mean, there's certainly give and take, as you say. It reciprocates, the support goes in both directions, but fundamentally, when I was at Zildjian, I made it clear, and I did this in a respectful way with everybody, that if you can provide us the kind of exposure that we need and that we're looking for, we can work together. But it behooves a company to sign someone that isn't able to do that. It becomes, and I'll get a little philosophical, but I think there are a lot of companies that are throwing out the word endorsements to people, and really what they're doing is selling factory direct. They're just taking the money away from a music store, and we're looking at drum shops going out of business because there aren't enough people coming in and buying gear from them, and it's a real trickle down. I could go on about that for a long time.
Well, you've been privileged to work with some of the best, most exciting, most well-known artists in the world. I got to think that the Mission from GAD tour clinics had to be a highlight of that type of event.
For those for clinics, absolutely. We actually did at Zildjian. We did, I want to say, about 5 or 6 of them total within about a 4 or 5 year period, and we did 3 in the U.S. and then a couple in Europe and South America, and they really were. And it's a number of kind of components that went with that. And first and foremost, Steve Gadd. Anything that Steve does is always great, and we have this personal relationship that I'm proud to say, a very deep, friendship, and that made it, just the time with him made it so special, because we did some serious work, we did some great things. When he goes out to do something, he gives you 300%, and it's obvious because he's working all the time. But the fun times were the best times. We really had a lot of fun doing that too.
Well, as if you didn't have enough on your plate, you've also been executive producer of some pretty large projects.
Yeah.
video production and all of that.
Yeah.
Is that something new to you? Did you have to go to school on that?
No, actually, referring to the when I was at Zildjian, we did a Drummers Achievement Awards that honored Steve, and I was in charge of really putting the whole show together from start to finish. And by virtue of having organized clinics and other major events, this was a sort of the granddaddy of it all. Everything from dealing with Bill Cosby and his manager and all the artists. We had James Taylor's band there as the house band. I got to draw from a lot of experience, but it was a labor of love. It was a year of putting this all together, and it was just a lot of stuff that all came together. Just
well,
right.
now that you've sort of retired from Zildjian, I guess we could use that word.
Yeah.
You're not retired. You're playing a lot more drums now, right?
I am, yeah.
And then tell us about Viper management.
Well, Viper, the name Viper, interestingly, came from Steve Gadd. And when I was promoted to vice president with Zildjian about 10 or 12 years ago, and when Steve found out about that, he started calling me VIP and VP and Vipe. And then one time we were on a tour bus, and I don't know, I think I was complaining about something, and he said something like, he called me a viper. He said, "Wow, you're like a viper," and then the name stuck. So years later, we stayed in touch even after I left Zildjian, and my wife and I were on one of these river cruises in the Danube a couple of years ago, and I get a call from Steve. We're in Budapest. I get a call from Steve sitting there, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm in Budapest on the Danube." He said, "What?" So we started talking about business, and he said, "What should I do about this?" And I don't know how to deal with this. And when you get back, maybe could you help me with this? And I said, "Yeah. I mean, what do you need me to do?" And he said, "Well, I'm getting calls for clinics, and I don't really know how to handle it." And I said, "This is typical Steve." And I said, "Steve, are you asking me to manage you?" And he said, "Hey, let's not get ahead of ourselves now. Don't go putting words in my mouth." And I said, "Do you want me to represent you?" And he said, "Now we're talking." So,
okay. So who are your other clients?
As well as Steve, there's Peter Erskine, Rick Marotta, and Danny Serafin.
The A-list.
Well, they're pretty special guys, and all those guys are my really great friends. And the funny thing with Steve is it's sort of like it's evolved over time. But when Peter found out I was working with Steve, it was typical Peter. He said, so he had that look on his face. He said, "So tell me about what you're doing with Steve." And I told him. He said, "All right, I want in. How do I get in on this?" And then Rick and Steve are very close, and Rick said, "Sure, I'm chopped liver." So
Well, good luck with that new venture. I'm sure you'll exceed that, and as you do with everything else. Thank you for spending some time with us.
Oh,
John.
my pleasure. It's an honor. Thank you.
This is your host, Marco Vosspine, and I want to thank our friends at Atlanta Pro Percussion, Dannette Classic Drums, Sabian Cymbals, and Classic Drummer Magazine. We'll see you again in 2 weeks.